So I put my hair in a ponytail, and I got a second wind. I had some water. And I feel like let's cover some more pages. At least let's just see how far I can get. This is starting at chapter 9, page 69. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. By the time Logan strolled into work, Juliet tried to tell herself it didn't matter. His job was his business, but that wasn't entirely true. As standing manager at Romero's flower shop, it was her responsibility to oversee everything that went on, which included the business of Romero's slow-moving, swaggering nephew. "Nice of you to finally make it in," she said when he came through the back door. She spent most of the morning swamped with customers and orders, and in the middle of it she had to deal with Logan's lumberyard delivery all by herself. He walked over to the coffee pot, poured himself a cup from the new machine. His face looked drawn, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. Juliet crossed her arms and opened her mouth to speak, but Logan held up a hand. "Before you start," he said, "you should know that my answer to everything for the next 5 minutes is going to be coffee." Page 70. "You should know that you're late," she tossed back. "We open at 8 o'clock here." He raised his mug in salute and took a sip. "The lumber company stopped by this morning at 8:30, she continued, "and since you weren't here, they started dumping all the supplies in the front walkway, and this time the store was filled with customers." Logan leaned against the counter and regarded her with bloodshot eyes. He took another slow sip. "What is wrong with you this morning?" she blurted. "You look like you drank one too many shots of tequila last night and had to crawl home on your lips." His mouth lifted at one corner as if he found her amusing. "It's not funny," she said, with growing annoyance. "You're supposed to be here on time so you can handle all the remodel stuff." He closed his eyes and rubbed his face with one hand. "A friend kept me up all night." An image of the pretty blonde from the bonfire flashed across Juliet's mind. She wrapped around him like a human pretzel, and it hadn't seemed to bother him. Juliet bristled. "Look, if you want to party all night with Susie Sunshine, go right ahead, but you're still expected to show up on time here and get some actual work done. The rest of us have a job to do. Our jobs. I'm sure Romero wouldn't be thrilled that you're dragging in 2 hours late on your second day of work." Logan stopped with his cup halfway to his mouth. "Susie Sunshine?" "That girl from the barbecue." He frowned. "You mean Bella." "Whatever. She wouldn't know because she didn't care." Page 71. "We weren't partying," he said casually. "Not all night. Anyway, I wasn't up for it." She had the sudden urge to throw something at him. Instead, she smiled sweetly. "Stamina problems, huh? Not a shocker. It's your second day on the job, and you can't even keep up." Logan set his cup on the counter with a loud thud. An unspoken challenge was in his eyes. All Juliet's nerve ending went on high alert. She suddenly felt like a rabbit in the plain sight of a wolf. His gaze slid lazily down her body in a sensual caress, then back up to linger on her mouth before meeting her eyes. "I have no problem keeping up, Juliet." He drew her name out on his tongue like he could taste it. "I'd be happy to prove it to you if you don't believe me." Heat scorched up the back of her neck, across her cheeks, chest, and limbs. He was looking at her as though he knew all her dark secrets, which was absurd. No man ever knew her that intimately. Sure, she'd been with guys before, but she'd never been able to give herself away emotionally. She just wasn't that type to go overboard into lovey-dovey territory and start blabbing all her secret feelings and desires. Juliet had learned a long time ago that the people you love tend to leave. And that's just the way it was. No one ever looked at her that way. He was looking at her now. He made her feel vulnerable and exposed. She didn't like it. Pulling her feelings aside, she steered the conversation back into neutral waters. Must remain professional. "You should have been here on time." "Looks like you managed just fine without me. In the future," she continued, using her best manager voice, "I expect you to keep to your schedule." Logan crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. That was page 71. Here's 72. "See, now that's the tricky thing about expectations," he drawled. "If you set the wrong ones, you'll always be disappointed." "Is that what you had to tell Bella last night?" she shot back. Logan blinked, then he did the most startling thing. He tipped his head back and laughed. It was mesmerizing, the sound of it filling the room like a favorite song she'd play over and over in a loop if she could. The look on him, the head back, broad shoulders shaking, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She could have grown roots and stayed there in that moment, bathed in the warmth of his laughter for the next million years. This was madness. Definitely not neutral waters. How long will it take to build the redwood deck? She demanded. Logan's laughter ended on a chuckle. I'm not. But you're supposed to build it, she insisted. Romero said so. It's part of the plan to make the shop more inviting. Someplace people would want to sit and relax. Right now, most of her bath products were on repurposed bookshelves near the register. Once they were moved to a bigger plants to the deck, she'd finally have that space to set up a gift shop in the corner. That was her plan. I'm not building a redwood deck, Logan said through a yawn. All her annoyance shifted to anger. No one messed with her plans, as not even him, especially not him. I discussed it with Romero already, she said. We have a vision for this place, and this renovation is ours, not yours. You're supposed to follow the orders. All the mirth was gone from his face, unreadable. Don't worry about it, sweetheart, he said softly. I've got it all worked out. That was page 72. Page 73. The endearment pricked against her skin like a tiny thorn. I am not your sweetheart. No, he frowned. He tilted his head to his side as if those trying to remember something. That's odd. A twinge of unease gripped her. Surely he wouldn't remember something so stupid as a flowery love note written by a foolish girl. I seem to remember a note telling me otherwise. Crap. Juliet spun away, began washing her hands at the sink. I don't know what you're talking about. It's been a long time, he said casually, like he was trying to recall something as mundane as the weather forecast. But I clearly remember a note. I was 14. She squared her shoulders and turned to face him. Kids do stupid things. Logan said nothing, just stood there looking at her as if he could read all the things that she wasn't saying. She hated that about him. Even back when they were kids, he always seemed to see beyond the front that she put up for others. I'm surprised you even remember that, she said lightly. Well, it's not every day a guy gets a letter with what were those, pressed flowers? Embarrassment flooded her. She still remembered placing the forget-me-nots in the note she so carefully written on that full moon. He seemed so much older than her back then, but she'd been so convinced that he was her soulmate. The note had been an attempt at a love spell. She wanted to reveal her feelings so he wouldn't leave. Why did people always leave? It was such a pretty note, he said, with a swirly writing. You said you wanted to be my sweetheart. I remember that clearly. Juliet crossed her arms, annoyed. I was kind of an idiot back then. Page 74. Again with a secret smile. I thought it was cute. Well, Denise sure didn't. Denise had been his on-again, off-again girlfriend. She was one of those students with perfect clothes and a trust fund swagger. Juliet felt the long-forgotten humiliation swell up inside her all over again. Did you know she made copies of that note and plastered them all over the girls' locker room to humiliate me? Logan's easy smile faded. I didn't know that. She gave a half shrug to show him it didn't bother her any more, even though the memory was a painful one. Denise was a mean girl, and I was a dumb kid. She was a mean girl, Logan agreed, and I was an idiot for going out with her. The silence stretched between them for a few moments, and Juliet found herself saying, Well, good thing that we're older and wiser now. You were probably a terrible judge of character back then. Hopefully, that girl you were with at that bonfire is a lot nicer. Logan dipped his head. Bella's all right. Good, Juliet fidgeted with the stem cutters beside the sink. We're old family friends, he said, as though it needed some sort of explanation. Great! He might think that they were just friends, but Juliet had seen the way the girl looked at him. She was obviously smitten. Juliet knew because she was pretty sure that she once looked at him that same way. Our parents used to play golf together. Juliet tried to ignore the dull ache that settled over her like a well-worn blanket. After her mom died, her dad had never really recovered. Juliet had practically raised herself. If it hadn't been for her cousin Emma, the loneliness would have eaten away at her until she was just a shell, like her dad. No one ever played golf in her family. No one played anything. Concern etched his face. What is it? This is page 75. Once again he saw too much. Juliet shook off the old memories and steeled herself. It was time to focus on important things that mattered, like the florist shop, her future. She wasted enough time on Logan this morning. Look, it's going to be a busy day, and I really don't have time to sit around and talk about your date in life. I don't care who or what you do on your hours off, okay? Just show up for work and on time and stay out of my way. He was silent for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then he turned away and rinsed his mug in the sink. Juliet could almost feel the walls go up between them. Fine. It was better that way. She blindly grabbed the nearest bunch of long-stemmed roses from the bucket on the floor and plunked them on the table, adding, "Please just start on the redwood deck like you're supposed to." "Not gonna happen," he said coolly. "I need to set posts for the greenhouse this week, but don't worry about the deck, sweetheart. I'll get to it when I get to it." He was out the door before she could argue. Juliet stood there after he left, running her fingers over the delicate blooms. The petals unfurled slowly, releasing a sweet perfume into the air. "I am not your sweetheart," she whispered. The flowers said nothing, but their significance was loud and clear. Coral roses signified desire. Moving forward. Page 85 and 86. "Not on her," Logan said firmly. "Not at all." She dropped the towel and then she turned to pick it up. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. She put on way too much, I guess." Why did Juliet look so bothered? Maybe she was sensitive about her bath products. "Don't worry, I'm sure the perfume would be fine on someone else." She gazed at him as if there was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said, standing close enough for him to see tiny flecks of green in her blue eyes. Green like all the plants she loved, like the sprig of leaves still stuck in her head. Without thinking, he tried to pull it free. Juliet started to lean away. "Hold on," he said. He settled a hand on her shoulder. "There's something in your hair." He could feel the warmth of her skin underneath her flimsy cotton top, hear the soft rise and fall of the breathing as she stilled. There was almost a papillon thumb of energy in the air between them as he worked the leaves free. Page 86. "There," he said, murmured, looking down at her. She didn't look away or turn away. She looked back, her eyes half closed, as if in a trance. Lips were soft and inviting. With infinitesimal slowness, Logan leaned in like he was the tide and she was the shore, and though no fault of his own, his body was drawn to her. It was as if the inevitability of them coming together was decided long ago by some force as old as time. Oh, beautiful. Page 105. This is going to be a long part 2. Bear with me. He studied her for a long moment and then said softly, "You know what I think, Juliet?" She shook her head, unable to answer. Whatever he was about to say, she didn't want to hear it. What she want was to run her hands up the front of his shirt and feel the hard ridges of his muscle underneath, slide his arms around his neck and dig her fingers into his thick hair, pull him closer, and see if the lips were as warm and soft as they looked. Danger! She backed into a wall behind her. He slowly closed the space between them, his dark eyes fixed on her. "I think you do like me." She tried to scoff, but it sounded too breathy. "No, I don't. You annoy me." "I didn't always." He searched for her face beneath the thick lashes. "I kissed you once before. Do you remember?" A thrill shot through her. "No," she said, lying. This liar, whoever lied. She never forgot that first kiss as long as she lived. She was 14. He was 18. It had been fleeting and unexpected and thrilling, but bittersweet. She'd foolishly thrown herself at him, and he treated her like a child. "I must not have done a very good job at it then," he said. "Must not have." She licked her suddenly dry lips and tried to sound nonchalant, but hey, don't beat yourself up. Page 106. "Not everyone can be a natural at it, just to stick things to you're good at, like trash ball." With infinitesimal slowness, he leaned closer until she could feel the heat of his body just inches from her. "I was just a kid back then when we kissed." "I'm sure nothing's changed," she whispered, inside shaking like a sapling in a windstorm. "Let's find out." She opened her mouth to say no, but the words dissolved on the tip of her tongue. Logan's mouth curved up at one corner. "I dare you." When he dipped his head and she met him halfway because he dared her, so what else could she do, right? He brushed his mouth softly against hers at first, demanding nothing, giving nothing. It was carefully controlled, just like the light sight of barely parted lips, their breaths mingling as he braced his hands against the wall behind her. Juliet squirmed instinctively, pressing closer until the full length of her body made sudden contact with his. Logan exhaled sharply, sliding a hand around her waist, his powerful arm anchoring her against him. When he deepened the kiss, her entire body went molten. Everything about him was hot and hard, and he tasted a bit like cinnamon gum and sweet, wicked promises, the kind that whispered between two lovers in the dark. When he finally drew back, they both stared at each other, their breaths mingled in the space between them. Juliet swallowed hard and fought to get back to the place that she was before. "Hated it," she whispered. It was terrible." He lowered his gaze to her mouth, his large hands on the nape of her neck, thumb stroking delicately near the sensitive spot behind her ear. "Maybe we should try it again," he murmured, "just to be sure." Page 107. Uh-oh. Well, it looks like we're going to be reading until at least page 111. She reached up and sank her hands into his hair, pulling him down so she could kiss him again. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her future self was yelling at her for acting like a lunatic and jumping into such dangerous waters. But her present self was kicking back on an inflatable raft with a Mai Tai shouting, "Come on in, the water's fine." When they finally pulled away from each other, they were both breathing hard, and Logan looked at her like he'd never seen her before. It was the kind of look a person gave when he was focusing all his attention like a sharpshooter homing in on his target. Juliet suddenly felt exposed. She was no man's target. She slid away and moved toward the entrance to the back room. Their eyes locked again on each other. A crease started to form on Logan's forehead. He seemed bothered. Now he was looking at her like she was a problem. Juliet bristled. She was no man's problem either. She forced a small laugh. That was a pretty weird experiment. His frown deepened. "Experiment?" "Yeah," she nodded, going with it. "And I'll say it again, it was not as horrible as I expected, but I don't plan on repeating it." An emotion flashed across his face, too fast for her to catch. Then he stood soldier straight, his voice carefully controlled. "It was a bad idea." Something stabbed at her insides. "Agreed." He was still frowning when he said, "It won't happen again." Then he headed for the door. She escaped to the back room and began scrubbing down the cutting table. When that was clean, she started on the kitchen sink. Then the counters. The physical work made it easier not to think. What in holy heart attack had just happened? She really needed to sweep the floor. Logan kissed her. Probably should mop it too, and then she kissed him back. What the hell? She dragged the mop out of the bucket and closed the closet near the bathroom and proceeded to make a mental list of all the reasons that kiss was no big deal. It was just a dumb experiment. Both of them agreed it would never happen again. She squeezed the front of the mop and began on the floors. Several minutes later, she swiped a lock of her hair out of her face and surveyed the squeaky clean room. Better. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Everyone had momentary lapses of sanity once in a while. The thing about Logan would just have to be hers. As long as they both never spoke of it again, everything would be fine. That was page 108. 109. There's this character named Brock that, and when I say that, it reminds me of Brock Lesnar on WWE every time. He's supposed to be an Australian, and they're having this big show in the area for the summer, and he tries to make moves on Juliet. Page 109. Brock jumped on and motioned Juliet to climb up behind him. "Stop." Logan's voice was deep and commanding. "Where's her helmet?" Brock looked over at Logan in surprise. "I don't use one myself." He dragged a hand through his hair and fluffed it. "Not very comfortable." "A hell of a lot more comfortable than decapitation or brain damage," Logan said darkly. He strode toward them like a god of thunder, about to cast lightning. Julia felt the sudden need to shield Brock. "We're fine here, Logan," she said. "Go away." He stood his ground. "You can't ride that thing with a helmet, even if he does." "Now, see here, mate," Brock began. "I'm not your mate," Logan said in a steely voice to her. He said, "You're not getting on that thing." Juliet clenched her hands into fists, angry heat rising up the scorch across her face. "This isn't your business. You don't get to order me around. I've lived my whole life without your interference, so I think I can know how to take care of myself." She turned to mount the motorcycle. Granted, she knew what she was being reckless, but something about the way Logan tried to control her after he said their kiss had been a mistake really ticked her off. And she and Brock was only going to dinner 5 blocks away. How dangerous could 5 blocks be? Before Juliet could swing her leg over the bike, she felt strong hands around her waist. She was hauled into the air and pulled against the solid wall of Logan's chest. "Let me go," she demanded, kicking her legs. She wasn't petite, but he made her feel low. She weighed nothing more than a piece of dandelion fluff. Logan released her. I'm not letting you risk your life on that stupid motorcycle like this. It's not your concern, Juliet said, seething. You're not here to be my watchdog. You're here to take care of the remodel. Romero told me to make sure that you had what you needed, and cracking open your skull on the street with this idiot, he jerked his chin at Brock, is not what you need. Brock jumped off the bike, squaring his shoulders. Something flashed across his face, and if Juliet didn't know any better, she'd call it exhilaration. Brock seemed to be thriving on drama. If the camera crew was here, they'd be getting some prime footage for the show. Poor Tweedledee and Tweedledum. They had no idea what they were missing. Page 1, that was 110. Here's 111. Okay, we're going to take it up to 113 and quit. Because my second wind is wearing off. Leave the lady alone, Brock demanded. Lady? She sure liked being called a lady, but it didn't have that kind of nice theatrical ring to it. You've got one of two choices, Logan said, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. Either you ride this thing out of here and don't come back unless you have a helmet for her, or the two of you can walk. Brock held his ground, which was surprising, given that Logan towered over him by several inches. And what if I don't? Like those choices. Then there will be consequences, Logan's voice said, as soft as a caress, but only with a fool would mess the barely conceivable threat beneath it. I can have the police here in less than 2 minutes, and you can make your excuses to them. Juliet could almost feel the testosterone crackling in the air. Logan didn't have that polished swagger and stage presence that Brock displayed, but he didn't need it. Brock scoffed, looking every bit of arrogant and celebrity. I have no time for this. He reached out his hand to Juliet. Come on. She placed her hand in his, and they followed down the walkway. When they reached the sidewalk, Brock turned to give Logan a mock salute. Then he draped an arm possessively around her shoulders, dropped a kiss on her cheek, and led her down the street. Okay. Page 112. Logan placed his hands on his hips and dipped his head. What the hell was he going to do about her? She was everything that drove him crazy, and nothing even close to that woman he should even want. So why was he having such a hard time keeping her out of his head? Now that he'd come home, Logan had made up his mind to seek a peaceful life. He didn't want any more chaos. He wanted to settle down and have a family, to find a woman who would make a great mother for his future children. Someone who would be calm and steady and reliable. Someone peaceful and even-tempered and even normal. Juliet Holloway was unpredictable. She was just as quick to anger as she was to laugh. She was disorganized and bossy. He felt a lot of strong emotions around her, but peaceful wasn't one of them. People had whispered about her and her family his whole life, the crazy Holloways who made magic spells. Even though Logan didn't put much belief into those things, and some people did, that Juliet had made was the furthest thing from normal. And if there was ever a woman who was the epitome of the wrong one for what he wanted for his future, it was her. And yet he couldn't deny the intense attraction he felt. Maybe it was throwback from his former days when he loved living on the edge and playing with fire. Juliet was like a flame he couldn't resist. He enjoyed watching her squirm, watching her get all feisty, watching her eyes go liquid with desire when he did kiss her, and damn it, if he didn't want to kiss her again. But he wasn't going to. If he wanted a woman to settle down with, a woman who would bring him peace, Juliet wasn't it. From now on, he was going to have to keep his head down and do his damn job. And hell, maybe even take Bella up on her invitations. If a distraction was what he needed to get Juliet out of his head, then that's what he would find. That was page 113. Oh, we can do these 2 pages. 128 and 129. Don't worry, Logan, she said softly. I won't put a magic spell on you, at least nothing permanent. Besides, there's no such thing as fairy tales, right? You have nothing to worry about. He watched her go, the white nightgown like a splash of light in the shadowy woods as she walked away. When he couldn't see her anymore, he finally turned around and walked back towards his house. Like hell, he had nothing to worry about. She was everything he didn't need, and yet he couldn't stop himself from wanting her. She was infuriating, alluring, impulsive, unconventional. He could count on both hands all the reasons she was not the girl for him. He wanted a peaceful life with a woman he could raise a family with, the type of woman who was reliable and sensible. He'd been, through enough chaos. He wanted roots, something steadfast. Logan had dated his fair share of wild women, the fun kind who make you laugh and were always up for a good time. He spent most of his days on leave in California when he wasn't stationed overseas. He and his buddies were always up for a party, and there was always women more than willing to participate. But that was before he'd seen how bad it could get, before the bombs, before he watched people he cared about die. Now all he wanted to do was be home. He was done with the wild life. And Juliet was wild, a free spirit whom he never quite understood. Even back when he only knew her as a waif-like kid, she'd been unusual, always with plants or flowers stuck into her pockets, hands grubby from digging in the dirt. Logan climbed up the stairs to the house, checking the loose planks in the porch floorboards. He was much better off, focusing on his renovation projects. Kevin was going to come by later, with help from the porch sanding. It would be good to watch the house improve over the next few weeks. God knew he needed to use a distraction. This is page 129. He glanced back into the woods. A pair of golden eyes watched him from beneath the fern. The cat seemed to be waiting for him. He turned and walked into the house, resolved to find a way to get Juliet out from under his skin. It was time to focus on the future. No more games. Juliet Holloway was a wild card, and he wasn't a gambling man anymore. And that is where we're going to stop, because I feel like that's a good place to stop. Page 135 is where we'll pick up. See y'all again tomorrow. My second win is out.